Final Fantasy XIV was the first MMO that I've stuck with for an extended period of time. I've played other MMOs before like Black Desert and most notably MapleStory, of which I've sunk quite a bit of time into, but it's more of a yearly 1 to 2 month phase. I never stuck with any of them for a long time except for Final Fantasy XIV. Recently, well, it's been about a month and a half, but Blizzard has released World of Warcraft Classic. For those who don't know, WoW Classic was a 2019 re-release of the original vanilla 2004 game without any of the expansions. So in Final Fantasy terms, it would be like releasing a separate server with only a Realm Reborn. It's been 5 years since WoW Classic, and so Blizzard has decided to do it again for the 20th anniversary of WoW, which brings us to now. Some of my friends have decided to try WoW Classic, so I thought I might as well give it a try as well. I'm still pretty early on, being level 23, but this video is basically just my thoughts from a Final Fantasy player's perspective.
Okay. Stop it. Oh, okay. Hello? Hello, I'm trying to play the game. Hello? Oh shit, do I live? Okay.
I think the first major distinction I noticed between the two games, even from the very early levels, is the emphasis on auto attacks in WoW. For reference, I'm leveling a warrior, and I know that the experience of a warrior is quite different to that of a mage or a warlock. But still, this is just my experience. My main source of damage came from auto attacks and not skills. The skills I did use costed Rage, which is the warrior's resource, and often it would either be Rend, which is a dot, or Sunder Armor, which reduces the target's armor so that my auto attacks would deal more damage. There would be a lot of downtime as often I wouldn't have enough Rage to use my GCDs. In Final Fantasy, from level 1, you're meant to keep your GCD permanently rolling in combat. This is possible because for most classes, the main 1-2-3 combo is free as it doesn't cost any resource. And so the main damage comes from skills and not auto attacks. I'm not sure if this changes in the endgame, nor am I saying that it's a bad thing, it's just a different combat system that I haven't entirely gotten used to yet. Questing in WoW gives a considerable chunk of XP. In fact, for most classes, and especially Warrior, questing is the main way you level. From what I've heard, mages can farm mobs by pulling a pack and AoEing, but that's quite privileged. This is the second point that occurred to me. Side questing in Final Fantasy, that is, quests with these icons, give essentially nothing. It gives almost non-existent XP, and also never gives substantial rewards either. The main source of XP comes from the MSQ or main scenario quest, which progresses the story. WoW on the other hand encourages questing way more with usually decent rewards and good XP. Albeit a lot of the quests are the typical go to this area and kill X mobs or loot X amount of items, these ones are always the worst because the drop rates vary. This also goes hand in hand with the fact that killing mobs also give decent XP, whereas in Final Fantasy, killing mobs in the overworld gives virtually none. This overall just gives a lot more incentive to do side quests, which kind of was an odd feeling after only playing Final Fantasy for a while, as I pretty much never do it in that game. We were talking about MSQs in Final Fantasy, and now it's time to talk about the MSQ in WoW, except I can't because there isn't anything equivalent to that in WoW. There is lore of course, in fact I've heard that the Warcraft lore is pretty nuts, but it's not directly told in the game. The game kind of just puts you on the map and says go, which has both pros and cons. The pros is that I feel a lot less restricted and pressured to do a specific series of quests. I can just run around the map exploring and find new areas, doing quests on the way, and I wouldn't be punished for it. But some part of me also wanted a sense of direction, a destination of some sort to get to. The map can get overwhelming at times considering the size of it, and yes, I used the Questy add-on because questing is quite literally impossible without it, and unlike Final Fantasy, it's welcomed. Some of the add-ons are genuinely pretty funny and cool. For example, my favorite add-on right now is Peggle. Gives me something to do while running 2,000 yards for a fetch quest, and I can flex on my friends with my score. I was talking a bit about add-ons before, so let's get more into it now. WoW is a game that pretty much needs add-ons to be played in modern times. I can't fathom playing this game without Questy or Bagnon. Simple quality of life add-ons that make such a huge difference in the experience of playing the game. Questy shows you where certain services are on the map, like vendors, repairs, and also keeps track of your accepted quests and shows you where to go for those quests. Without Questy, I'd be walking around the map with absolutely no destination and no clue where to go. I get that in 2004, the wonder of the game was probably the immersion of being in a fictional Warcraft world, and walking around the world was probably just mystical. But I guess in 2025, when the main objective is to level, it's kind of annoying not to know where to go. Bagnon is an add-on that groups all your bags together in one tab. So all these bags here without Bagnon would only show a few tabs, but with Bagnon I can just press B and all the tabs will be shown. I don't even know why this wasn't included in the base game, it just seems like something you should have. I also had rested XP from levels 1 to 20, but in hindsight I probably shouldn't have used it as I didn't really learn how to play the game and just ended up following the arrow. The graphics of WoW have grown on me. When I first launched the game and I saw the polygons, I have to admit I wasn't terribly impressed. But having spent time on the game, I've come to appreciate the art style of the game. Obviously, it's not next-gen graphics, and it's not even up to date, but like I've always said, style trumps graphics every single time. And this game definitely has style. Now, I actually quite like the look of the game, it just took a bit of time to get used to. Now the dungeons. WoW dungeons are wildly different to Final Fantasy dungeons. In fact, they're so different I wouldn't even call them the same type of content. As of current, I've only done one dungeon, the Dead Mines, but I can already tell that the design is completely different. In Final Fantasy, the dungeons are always, without fail, mobs, boss, mobs, boss, mobs, boss, end of dungeon. The tank has a stance that they can turn on which basically allows them to generate massive enmity or threat in WoW terms. The tank then runs through the dungeon, pulling all the mobs that are on the way until they hit a wall that stops them from going further until they've cleared all the mobs. Then everyone burns down the mobs using AoE skills. It's also instance as well, meaning that you're usually queuing for it when chilling in the overworld. It's quite hard to die in these dungeons as the healer's healing is usually more than enough to keep the tank alive, and the tank doesn't have to worry about enmity since they have stance. WoW on the other hand requires a pre-made party to travel in the overworld to a specific location. Not only that, but the layout and pulls of the dungeon is completely different too. You can never really pull more than 3 to 4 mobs at once as the mobs deal considerable damage and the mana supply of healers is quite limited. At least that was my experience with Dead Mines. I'm not sure if this changes in the later dungeons. I also wasn't really used to having to generate and keep threat on enemies and carefully pulling small packs. There's no tank stance in WoW like there is in FF, so having to think about and keeping an eye out for any mobs that aggroed onto my mage or healer was just an extra thing to keep track of. The pulls had to be more tactical too. Like I said in FF, the tank would just run and pull all the mobs until they can't anymore. But in WoW, sometimes when you're limited on resources or don't have enough people, you have to devise a plan for a pack of even 2 to 3. For example, a common strat that we did was for a pack of 3, mark one enemy as the moon and another as the skull. When pulling, the moon marked enemy should be permanently polymorphed whilst the tank aggroes the skull and the non-marked enemy. The rest of the party then focuses on the skull enemy and then the non-marked. Little things like this made the dungeon experience feel better for me than the dungeons in FF. And to wrap it up, Final Fantasy dungeons feel like an instanced area, whereas in WoW, dungeons feel like a part of the overworld. I have to talk about these social interactions in WoW. I feel like out of everything I've talked about, this one stands out the most. The fact that the game feels like there are other players playing the game. Now of course, I'm not oblivious to the popular city spots in Final Fantasy like Limsa, but it's not quite the same. Never in Final Fantasy have I met someone doing the same quest as me in a random area and partied up together to do it. Within the measly 30ish hours I played on WoW, I've had 4 separate instances where I met a random player and we partied up to finish the same quest together, because killing groups of mobs solo in WoW, early on at least, is actually quite difficult. And I'm playing on a low population server too. I imagine this would be much more common in higher populated servers. It's a small thing, but it really brings a sense of community and immersion. It doesn't feel like I'm playing a single player game, which is what the large majority of MMOs feel like nowadays, until maybe the endgame. MMOs are massively multiplayer online games, and I think that it should feel like there are people playing the game, doing the same things that you are, and you should be able to meet them while playing. And of course, there are smaller details too, like how you can't immediately use a new weapon type, you need to level the skill up for it first. The lack of mounts and instant teleports, etc. But I feel like these things aren't all that important, or I guess they haven't impacted my gameplay enough to be bothered talking about it. That about wraps it up for my thoughts. If you stuck around, thanks for listening to me yap, and I'll probably make a new video when I'm closer to the endgame. But yeah, I'll catch you guys later.